so as I told you, so you can use high and a low, and you will mix them, generating a 50% intermediate level, and you can mix the intermediate level with the low value to generate a 25%, and you can use the 50% value with the 100% value to generate a 75% level, and then you will have 5 levels of the analyte which you can use to verify the reportable range. Now, each concentration you should measure 3 or 4 times because you don't want a single value to be out of range, and you have it was only a technical small error which will render your whole validation experiment useless. So always try to measure the same or the analyte 3 or 4 times in each level, and then you have to compare it to the total allowable error. You have to decide for yourself if the deviation from the line, because when you're doing linearity, you have to demonstrate that the concentration during the whole reportable range behaves linearly, and once you see that it will deviate from a straight line, you have to decide if that deviation, if that is acceptable when you look at the total allowable error, the amount of error that is that a method may differ from based on biological variation and analytical variation of a analyte. That's a concept that is a little bit difficult to explain now without any whiteboard or anything, but you have to realize for yourself that some methods have a very, very tight biological variation. Their concentration in the blood is very small, so this will mean that your total allowable error is very small, and that as an analytical new method there is not very much room for error there. So that's something that you will use in the trying to verify if the method is linear. Now, the replication experiment is, I think, something that everybody nowadays should know about. It's very simple. It will give us information about random error, precision, and it's usually done in 2 ways within day. On the same day, same medical technologist, same batch, they will run a sample, usually 2 levels, 20-fold. Sometimes I see them running them 10-fold. Usually that also gives a good indication. In the United States, it's usually that it should be done 20-fold. That each level has to be measured 20 times. It's also it's also the same for the between run, which is being done on more days. So you have to measure the same levels on day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 5. What we see now in the new CLSI protocols is that you get a more comprehensive way of doing the between run, because waiting for 20 days usually is a lot of time, and its time is not usually on our hands in laboratories. I don't think it's a secret that usually the old reagents are not in stock anymore, and the new reagent is the only one which is available. So yeah, you simply have to put the new reagent into use, and therefore 20 days is a long period. And what laboratories do is they do like a more comprehensive way of performing the between run precision, and that's by doing the same 2 levels but 4 times a day, morning, early afternoon, morning, late morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, during 5 days. 5 times 4 is 20, and it's the same 20 samples, and it will give you, like what we say, an intermediate estimate of the between run precision. Of course, it's better to have 20 days, but usually, as I said before, time is not on our hand. The concentration at which we have to perform those experiments is being decided by the medical decision levels. You have to realize for yourselves that, or we have to realize for ourselves that sometimes physicians have certain concentration levels of certain analytes. For instance, let me give you one of those. Potassium, which has a medical decision level of about 2.5, 3 millimoles per liter, or around 6. So those are concentrations that you have to use in your experiments. It's not interesting from a quality point of view to perform replication experiments using a potassium level of 9 or something. It's not medically relevant, that decision level. But usually internal controls are which are available from commercial vendors or which are available from the supplier are usually already aligned with the medical decision levels, because otherwise people simply wouldn't buy them. Now, the method comparison is a very important part of the validation experiment. You usually, what the CLIA says, the Americans say, is that you have to use 40 samples covering the entire reportable range. We try to do it with less, because 40 samples will mean 40 times the old methods, 40 times the new method, usually in replicate testing, so it will mean a lot of reagents that will be used in this experiment. So we try to do with less samples, usually in practice using 20 samples. What we do focus on is the part that you will take into account the whole reportable range. So you won't be using only normal patients, but you will try to include sick patients as well, low results as well as high results, which will make you more vulnerable to interference. But that's good, which at the same time you can check for interference in your new method. Now you have to measure all samples in duplicate. You will not do that on one day, but pretty much the same as the intermediate precision. You will smear that out over a period of 5 days. So those two experiments, the intermediate precision, which we have seen in the earlier slide, and this, the method comparison, are those two experiments that you can do together in order to limit the amount of time that you are performing validation experiments. Usually a validation experiment for a new method will take about 5-6 days, and then your working days, and then you're finished. You will do the old method and the new method for the same sample, preferably within 2 hours of each other. And then you will have to plot it using a difference plot. And the difference plot is not the same as plotting the old method to the new method, but this is much more of a calculating the mean, and for each mean, the mean between the old and the new one, calculating the difference from the new method to the mean. And this will give you a very good indication of constant error, especially at higher concentrations. It will also give you a good indication of proportional error. So the comparisons, the method comparison using at least 20 samples, or 40 as the Americans like to do it, using sick patients, but smearing it out over a couple of days will give you a good estimate of bias and other issues. Recovery is a study that we usually do if we have an element or an analyte that is commercially available, usually for more complex methods such as hormones or tumor markers or anything. This is like a little bit different or difficult, or you have to have patient samples. No, you cannot. I'm sorry, you cannot use patient samples because patient samples have substance in it which will interfere. So you usually have a problem for recovery studies, but to be performed if you don't have the analyte purified and available from a chemical manufacturer or something. But it's very simple. You have to add the analyte or add water, and you have to demonstrate that the recovery is 100%. If it's not 100%, then you know that there is an issue with the recovery, and this will mean that perhaps there is a proportional error in your method. Usually we do not perform this type of experiment here on the islands due to the fact that the analytes are usually not commercially available to us. Or you have to buy 10 grams of cortisol for which you will only use 10 milligrams, and the rest you can throw away because you will never use it again. So it's something that's has some practical issues, but it's an experiment which theoretically is very easy to perform. The limit of detection is not something that we use, that we are not performing standards. It's something that we usually look at the information that is being provided by the manufacturer and usually take that information and put it into our validation report. We can do that, that's no problem, because usually you will have problems generating concentrations at the lower part of the reportable range. What you can do is you can also use lower calibrations from the manufacturer, but hence you will use all your manufacturer's calibrator, and this will only increase cost of the validation study. So usually we simply take it over. One of the last parts of my presentation will be on the verifying of reference intervals. It's a very simple thing to do, but usually laboratories don't do it nowadays. I try to put a lot of attention to it, because I think it's something that you need to verify, because otherwise you will be surprised. The first thing is that you can do when you're verifying the interval is that you simply use the information that's being provided by the manufacturer. You look at it, you see how the data is gathered, you will look into the reference interval as presented by the manufacturer and think by yourself, is this a population that is relevant for my population? And if so, you can simply use that reference interval as is being stated or is being claimed in the product insert. Better is to verify it, and how do you do that? This is by using 20 samples, and if from normal patients, then usually we will go to the blood bank, ask for 20 normals, also spread over a period of 5 days, or 4 on one day, on each day, 4 on each day, and we will check if every one of those will be within the reference interval as being claimed by the manufacturer. If 0, 1 or 2 are out of sight of the range, then we can use the reference interval as claimed by the manufacturer. However, if 3 or 4 are outside the range, then we have to bring in an additional 20 samples. Yeah. If 3 or 4, if 5 or more are outside of the range, then we have to throw away the whole verification experiment, and we have to do another way of establishing the reference interval, which usually means that we have to do more samples and do analytical statistical analysis of the data. You can also bring in the comparative method analysis, in which you use the reference interval from your old method and you will transfer it to the new method, eventually using factors for transferring the reference range. Now, as I said before, you have to we have done a lot of experiments now. You have to document it. It's usually not you're very familiar already with that. You have to, usually a laboratory has a procedure in which they describe how they validate methods, and based on that procedure, when they are implementing a new method and when they're validating, they will write a validation procedure for that new method, for instance microalbumin, and after the experiments are being performed, they will use the procedure to write a validation report in which all the information that's being gathered during the validation is being written down and being signed off by somebody who is the authoritative for this, who has the authority level to sign off this validation experiment or the validation report. So in a nutshell, I've presented to you the information that what is the international guidance on validation and how this is being translated into practical use or practical experiments here on the islands. I thank you for your attention.